Number 5. On January 3, 1943, Alan McGee, an American bomber gunner, found himself in a bit of a tricky situation. His plane, taking part in a combat sortie over occupied France, was hit by German anti-aircraft guns. The bomber caught fire, and then there was a massive explosion that tore the plane apart. The blast wave threw Alan out of the cockpit at an altitude of about 6,100 meters. He found himself in free fall without a parachute in icy air. A fall from this height usually lasts about 2 minutes, and there is no chance of surviving the landing. He remained conscious during the fall, which in itself is amazing, considering the speed of the fall, which reaches 190 to 200 kilometers per hour. The air currents were spinning his body, and the cold and lack of oxygen at such an altitude exacerbated the situation. At one point, he flew through the clouds, which may have slowed his fall a bit. At an altitude of about 1,000 meters, Alan noticed that he was approaching the ground. He was falling directly towards the town of Saint-Nazaire, where there was a large train station with a massive glass roof. That roof was his salvation. When his body crashed into the glass ceiling of the train station, the impact was softened, but not enough to avoid serious injury. The glass shattered and Alan flew through it, becoming entangled in the metal beams and steel cables that supported the roof structure. This stopped his fall and saved his life. The impact was so severe that his right arm was almost torn off. He lost most of his teeth, suffered multiple fractures to his ribs, legs, and arms, and severe internal injuries. Despite this, he remained conscious and even tried to move. Local residents and German soldiers nearby were shocked to see that a man who had fallen from such a height was still alive. They quickly rushed him to the hospital, where doctors began fighting for his life. Number 4. On July 3, 1978, Soviet physicist Anatoly Bugorsky became involved in one of the most incredible incidents involving radiation. He was working at the Institute of High Energy Physics in Protvino, where he was doing research on the U-70 particle gas pedal. The U-70 accelerates protons to high energies for various physical experiments. I've explained it to you in scientific language. I hope you understand. Bugorsky was checking the equipment that day when a fatal error occurred. The gas pedal's defense systems malfunctioned, and a beam of protons accelerated to an energy of 76 giga-electron volts. I can barely pronounce it. Went through his head. That's at about 260,000 kilometers per second. He described the sensation as a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, but felt no pain. Although the radiation dose Bugorsky received is estimated at 2,000 to 3,000 gray, by comparison, the lethal dose for a human is about 5 gray, he remained conscious and was even able to make his own way to the medical center. The immediate effects of the incident were horrifying. The left half of Bugorsky's face swelled to incredible proportions, and the skin on the back of his head and temple began to peel away. The proton beam caused tissue destruction at the molecular level, but surprisingly did not affect key areas of the brain responsible for vital functions. The doctors who examined Bugorsky were amazed that he remained conscious and could speak. He was immediately hospitalized and treatment began, although the prognosis was extremely pessimistic. In the weeks that followed, Bugorsky's condition worsened. The left side of his face was paralyzed and his skin continued to peel away. He lost hearing in his left ear and also began suffering from epileptic seizures caused by the brain damage. However, despite all predictions, Bugorsky survived. His body began to gradually recover, although the effects of the incident stayed with him for the rest of his life. Number 3. Roy Sullivan, an American forester from Virginia, made history as the man who survived the most lightning strikes. His incredible story began in 1942, while Sullivan was on a fire tower in Shenandoah National Park. The lightning struck the tower, traveled through Roy's body, and exited through his leg, leaving burns on his foot. Despite the pain and shock, he was able to climb down from the tower and make it to the hospital. The second strike occurred in 1969. Sullivan was driving a truck on a mountain road when lightning struck a tree next to the road. The discharge traveled through the tree, then through the open window of the truck, and hit Roy. He lost consciousness and his eyebrows and hair were completely burned off. However, he survived again. The third hit happened in 1970. Sullivan was on his property when lightning struck a transformer near his home. The discharge traveled through the wires and hit Roy, again leaving burns on his body. This time he suffered injuries to his shoulder and arm, but again managed to survive. The fourth strike occurred in 1972. Sullivan was working in the woods when a thunderstorm began. Lightning struck a tree near him and then hit Roy. He suffered burns to his head and arms and lost consciousness. He was found by co-workers and taken to the hospital where he began to recover again. The fifth hit happened in 1973. Sullivan was driving a car when lightning struck his vehicle. The discharge went through the radio antenna and hit Roy, again leaving burns on his body. This time he suffered injuries to his legs and back, but again survived. The sixth strike occurred in 1976. Sullivan was on a fishing trip when a thunderstorm began. Lightning struck the water near him and then struck his body. He suffered burns on his chest and abdomen, but was able to get to shore and call for help. The seventh and final strike happened in 1977. Sullivan was walking in the woods when lightning struck a tree near him. The discharge traveled through the tree and hit Roy, leaving burns on his head and chest. This time he suffered the most serious injuries, but again survived. However, he died under mysterious circumstances on September 28, 1983. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Number 2. On August 18, 2012, an incident occurred at a construction site in Brazil that shocked all who witnessed it. Eduardo Leite, a 24-year-old construction worker, was working on the site when a 2-meter iron rebar fell from the 5th floor. The sharp metal bar penetrated his helmet and entered the top of the man's head, going through and exiting between his eyes. Despite the incredible trauma, Eduardo remained conscious. He was able to make it to the hospital on his own, where doctors were amazed at what they saw. The rebar had gone through his head, but to the surprise of the medics, had not hit his vital vision and nerve centers. This gave hope of salvation, but the situation remained extremely dangerous. The surgeons immediately began the operation. The process of extracting the rod took 5 hours. The doctors acted with jewel-like precision to avoid damaging the brain and other critical structures. Every moment was worth its weight in gold, and the medical team worked hard. Eduardo Leite survived the long rehabilitation process. He was able to go on to live a full life. Number 1. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates, 2 experienced British climbers, began climbing the west face of Mount Ciula Grande, 6,344 meters, on a new route. On June 9, 1985, they reached the summit, but on their descent, the weather deteriorated. A snowstorm began, and visibility dropped to a minimum. At an altitude of about 5,000 meters, Joe Simpson slipped on an icy slope, fell, and broke his right leg. Simon Yates organized a descent system, tying Simpson to himself, but in conditions of strong wind, snowfall, and icy slopes, it was extremely difficult. And after a while, Simpson snapped and hung over an icy crevasse. Yates, unable to see him, began to slide to the edge of the cliff and, to save himself, cut the rope. Back at camp, Yates immediately called the rescue team for evacuation. Simpson, on the other hand, fell into a crevasse about 20 meters deep but survived by landing on a snow bridge. He had to spend the night in the crevasse, suffering from the cold and a broken leg. In the morning, he started looking for a way out, descended deeper, found a constriction leading to a glacier, and crawled for several kilometers, overcoming pain and exhaustion. On the 3rd day after the fall, he reached the base camp just as the rescue helicopter arrived, and he said,
"I'm back,"
and collapsed.